Okay, guys, I've been giving you lots of eye candy, ear candy, gear candy, everything from $1 Million Systems, Vox, Capital Audio Fest. But that's just part of my channel and what I'm known for. I like to showcase things that tangibly help you get better performance with that gear. Get the most out of that gear. Get what you paid for. And to that end, I've got a presentation today on room treatments by ASC, one of my favorite room treatment vendors. So stay tuned. Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a long video, but just in time, YouTube has started to allow you to do 3-minute shorts. And so with 3-minute shorts, I'm able to take a video like today over an hour long that many of you will enjoy. A lot of you guys that watch me like to go into the weeds. This is my niche, showing you guys sometimes the weeds, room treatments, things that get you the most performance out of your gear, and room treatments are right at the top of the list of accessories that I would focus on. And ASC tube traps are one of my favorites, and this is the presentation from Pacific Audio Fest that I didn't attend, but they sent me the slides and the audio that they recorded, and I put together. This is a pain in the butt to put together this video for you, but it's so valuable for certain niche and hobby. I know some people don't care about room treatments. They don't even use room treatment. I just found out today, I was reading a big reviewer. He's into measurements and all this, but he doesn't even use room treatments in his room. None. At least that's what he said. It's crazy to me. You cannot get the highest potential of gear, even if you've got DSP with the box. You want to hear your gear. You don't want to hear the room. DSP can help you the most. It can help in almost any situation, get you better. But when you combine it with room treatment so that you're hearing your gear and then you EQ your gear, this combination is where I've found over the years that harmonious combination. The two have to go hand in hand to get the highest level of performance. You ignore one or the other, you get good, but you never get great. You ignore both, forget about it. I mean, it's just, there's almost no chance that you're getting the potential of the gear you bought. Now, to that end, this is probably the last video you're going to see with the Extremes for a while, because starting tomorrow, I'm getting the Potpourri WR2s, the demo model from Capital Audio Fest here, so I can demo them, see if I want to order that sale model that I'm intrigued by and potentially want to get. So that'll be coming soon. Lots of other stuff I'm behind on. I mentioned in the last video all the stuff I'm behind on, but I've got stuff with Angela Gilbert Young I still have to do. Lots of surprises. I even haven't told some people in my membership group yet. So stay tuned, sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon. And pay attention to my YouTube shorts, because if you don't have time to watch this hour-long video, I'm going to be breaking it up into smaller parts. Just like I did with the Zoom I did recently, I'm breaking it up now into smaller parts, and so people that have less time can digest it. Hope you enjoy.
So this is a combination of curves of testing that people did, and up on top you have this area where it sounds like an echo. And what's interesting, I think, is early on, the reflected sound has to be louder than the initial sound to get an echo effect to be perceived. And then as you go out further in time, it can be quieter and quieter, and you'll still hear an echo. And then down here, this is a zone where you're not most people don't detect much of anything, so nothing happens. So this area here is kind of our interesting zone. The upper part of this white area is where the reflections are loud enough in a timing zone where they'll change the imaging. And arguably, you don't want that to happen. You don't want it to smear the soundstage or spread it, but sometimes people do want that. So it's kind of a taste thing. Sometimes the soundstage seems a little narrow, and you let the reflections widen it, and that can be a pleasant thing sometimes. But down in the lower section here is an area where it generally doesn't tend to affect the imaging very much. It's quiet enough that the imaging is pretty much intact, but you still get a spaciousness effect, and that's usually highly desired. People want to hear a sense of the space around them, the room being alive, but they want that imaging to stay tight and precise.
Spaciousness is not three-dimensionality or distance out?
It actually is different. I mean, the distance effect is something different. The spaciousness is just the sense that you're in a live space, and that you're not, that it's not closed in. You're not stuck in a muffled room. So you're getting a sense of openness, and your ears are detecting head stuff crossing your head from left and right, and a variety of frequencies. So if we're going to make this effect happen, we got choices of different kinds of speakers that have different effects. So dipole panels, we see a lot of those here today, and to show, and horn-loaded, we got those. We got some that are a combination of both. And then you've got omnidirectional speakers. There's a fantastic example of an omni speaker here today at the show. And then you have the more, the dynamic with a cabinet, which is the classic speaker. And so these all have a bunch of advantages and disadvantages, and all loved by many and not loved by some. But we'll focus on the dynamic driver, because that is still the most common type of speaker that's out there, and has kind of what we can talk. We have to focus on that the most, and so we'll talk about what that does, and how that interacts with the room typically, and how we can treat that to improve the imaging. How we treat a room.
Lots of tube traps.
What's that?
Oh, I said lots of tube traps in those rooms.
Yeah. So these are rooms you can see where they've got a lot of traps in there, and I wish I could go hear all those rooms. So when we're looking at a standard box speaker, one of the things that we want is the speaker itself to image as well as possible. And most modern speakers have gone to this kind of a design. It's just a top-down cross-section of the speaker. You see the driver there. And the edge of the cabinet is all rounded to minimize diffraction. And you can see like a more classic speaker in the past might have even a recessed baffle with a really hard square edge and little lips sticking out. And the grill goes inside that thing. And those tended to create quick reflections, and you end up with a kind of a confused signal coming in this way, and it does produce some smearing of the image. You can get an image that's not quite as tight and precise from that, and so most everybody seems to agree that minimizing that kind of effect nowadays is better, and it's clear why. You're getting a much cleaner signals each ear, and so the speakers have gotten better. They image better now. And then, so balance, we talked about this already. Imbalance skews imaging. If one speaker's louder than the other, if you're off center, if one's towed in more than the other, you're not going to hear things right where they're supposed to be. They're going to move off to one side or another. And this can be annoying, and it's going to generally collapse the sound stage on the whole if you do that. I think I've had rooms so disappointing to me that I never sat on the center on purpose. I'd sit off to the side, because this middle, their voice would go all over the place. It was when they hit a high note, they'd be here, and the low note, they'd go here. And it's like, okay, I'm just gonna I give up on imaging. So asymmetry is not good, and so ideally the room, we want symmetry with the speakers to make this thing work, and we've got to sit in the middle to get it optimized. And the room needs to be very symmetric as well. And if it's not, then we would try to treat it or do something to compensate for that and get it to sound symmetrical as we can, so we get a nice unworked image in the front of the room. And this is an example of what can happen with a typical reflection that you might get. So this is the speaker sitting right next to a wall, and we're looking down on it. And speaker is always pushed sound off to the side, so you get some very fast reflections. Some of these diffract around and go back in here and bounce around a few times and come out at you. Some of them bounce right off the reflection off the wall here. And what ends up happening is the sound is coming out to the listener out here at different angles, different timings, and you end up with a phantom image of the speaker kind of out here somewhere. And it's kind of blurry. So you end up with what sometimes affect people like. You end up with a soundstage wider than the speaker spacing. So that can be desirable, but it can also smear the imaging, so it's not as precise. And you have all these different timing arrivals and tonal shifts going on with all those sound waves interfering with each other, arriving at your ear at quick but slightly different timings. And then going back here to summary. So we've talked about all these issues. I can't read them.
Yeah, so we talked about the physiological aspect of it. The ear is, impressive, very, very sensitive and capable of locating sources. And some of these questions might end up going to you too, Tim, so don't get too comfortable.
I'll get up.
Yeah, ears are physically very capable, very sensitive of locating source information. And the main sensitivity is in the lateral direction. There's a little bit of sensitivity in the vertical, but much more in the lateral. So a lot of our attempts at optimizing the room to best provide a stereo image are going to focus on manipulating sounds in the lateral direction. And also, jumping right into a product description, ASC tube traps and all of our flat panel products only ever are designed to provide scattering of sound in the lateral direction. We find it, not useless, but not very useful to scatter sounds in the vertical direction. So diffusers that take incoming sound and scatter it randomly in both the vertical and the side-to-side direction, they don't really, in our opinion, in our experience, don't really enhance spaciousness that much at all. It's kind of all about the lateral. But the psychoacoustic functions that have evolved in humans over thousands and thousands of years to locate the sound of leaves crunching in the woods, a bird flying overhead about ready to dive, maybe a boat approaching from one side. Lots of mechanisms have allowed us to hone in this source locating mechanism, very, very well. So we're in a really good spot to perceive this stereo image accurately, just thanks to all of our gifts. And last, loudspeaker output must be very clean and very balanced, or the image will probably never reach full potential. So you got to start at the source in every case, and the piece of the signal chain that we're talking about here is between the speakers and your ears. Everything leading up to the speakers, of course, needs to be maintaining that stereo information, perfectly in order for anything else we're talking about to work out either. So we can't neglect the importance of all the electronic devices and cabling and the speaker construction, and then most importantly, in our opinion, the baffle of the speaker. All those need paid proper attention, but even if you do all that right, if you don't pay attention to what happens to the sound after it leaves the speakers, you're not going to get a good stereo image. So, so with all that said, and this lovely graphic down here that packs a ton of information into, I think everybody should frame it and put it up in their listening room, really. Does anybody have any, maybe kind of easy questions about the stuff we've told you so far?
Does a sealed box speaker design ameliorate some of the reflection problems?
Well, it's still going to be omnidirectional below.
Would you repeat those questions, please? We can't hear them back there.
Sure. He asked if a sealed box speaker design ameliorates any of the reflection problems, and in the bass range doesn't really change much. The sound is still going to be omnidirectional below a frequency that has mostly to do with the size of the front baffle, really. It does, the sealed box and potentially the transmission line or reflex box or, any number of dynamic cabinet design speakers are going to have a different enough dispersion pattern that the solution to create the best stereo imaging is going to be a little different with those than it is with an omnidirectional or a dipole or potentially a horn, I guess would be the other main category. Each of those will have dispersion patterns that will require control of the reflections in different ways and in different locations. But I guess to answer your question most directly, being sealed versus being ported or anything like that doesn't inherently help. You do still have to know the beam pattern, the general directionality of the speaker versus frequency to deal with reflections most effectively to only benefit your imaging. What do you got, Ron?
Just point out that the difference between ported and not ported in most cases is the fact that even at high frequencies, when you have, let's say, two-way, there is a reflection from inside the box that comes out through the port, out of phase.
Excellent point. Yeah, so Ron...
And that will cause all kinds of weird things going on. So
yeah, there's timing problems there for sure. So Ron's pointing out that the big difference between a sealed box design and a ported box, or any transmission line, any type of perforated box, if you will, is going to have reflections inside of the box that will then emanate from that port or whatever the exit hole of the box is, and will delay things and will generally muddy the bass and contribute to the room self-noise floor that we're going to tie into at the end. And so basically anything occurring within the playback system between the speaker and your ears is going to potentially catastrophically, but at the very least not positively affect the stereo imaging and stability of the soundstage that you're creating.
Yeah.
So that is a really good point, that in that respect the sealed box should always do a slightly better job.
Yeah, the big thing is the reflection. It's not so much low frequency, because there's not enough room in that box to do that much. But believe it or not, it's the high frequency tweeters. When you look at snare snaps and stuff like that, there is a reflection on the inside that people don't realize it does. They would think it doesn't put any sound out that direction. But that alignment comes out and smears usually high frequency snares and stuff like that.
Okay. So we'll say in another way that sealed boxes improve the timing of even high frequency output of the speaker. So, okay. But
in what frequency range are the edge diffractions of a rectangular box most important?
That's a good question. He asked, at what frequencies are the edge diffractions of a rectangular box most important? Well, that should be a function of the size of the baffle, for one thing, as well as the size of the diffracting object. In the graphic that we drew before, there was a hypothetical grill sticking out 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch off the edge, and that is going to create another reflection that goes toward the destination with a delayed time, on the order of both the distance between the tweeter and the edge of the baffle, and also the size of the reflective object. So I guess just off the cuff, it's probably usually in the 1.5 kilohertz and higher range, but there will also be certain frequencies that are going to be affected more dramatically, whose wavelengths or half wavelengths match that distance from the tweeter or mid-range to the edge of the baffle. So it can start to get pretty complicated, and that's why people will tend to position their drivers off center on the baffle. I don't want to get too much into the baffle details, since we aren't loudspeaker designers per se. I mean, we're both kind of hobbyists in that manner, but trying to focus more on the room acoustic piece of it. But that is a very important part that you point out, that if it isn't done properly and paid attention to properly, then once again, you're not going to ever achieve the stereo imaging that one could hope for. Okay, one more in the back there.
Yes. If I had a binaural recording playing through my stereo system in my room, and and the room is tuned correctly, should that binaural recording sound like a point in space? Maybe going back and forth, but it never does. But is that a way to tell that you have taken the bad vibrations out?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, if it's done, if it's a completely identical information in both the left and right, 100% identical, bit for bit, or whatever medium you're using to play it, and your system is dialed in properly, that should just be a minuscule point in space directly between the speakers, and not drifting with any frequency changes in the content, not drifting with any volume changes in the content. That is a pretty good test. I mean, that is the way, that does describe a manner in which some people balance out their systems just using, coherent pink noise, and then the same signal inverted on one side, so it's perfectly going to cancel if your system is dialed perfectly and your head is in the perfect spot. I would say the size of the position in which that would hold true is going to be pretty small, though. Head and traction kind of small. You might be able to move a few inches here and there, but it should be a good test. That if you were able to at least find a location near your preferred listening position in which the image was perfectly stable and tight and dime sized, which actually we'll get into in a moment here. That should be indicative of your system then working well with a proper stereo recording.
Well, I was just concerned that you almost take the room out of the recording completely, which would also feel unnatural. If it's too precise, it's almost like, my experience is the brain expects a little bit of noise in the signal. It's almost like the headphone effect.
Well, a monaural recording it's definitely not the focus of this, and it's not taking advantage of any of these principles, so it may sound a little bit unnatural, but it would also sound the way that it was recorded. It would sound faithful to the original capturing of the event. And if it did sound asymmetric, then that would be solely due to asymmetry of the room or asymmetry of your playback system. So if it was off center, that would again be a good sign that the system wasn't going to be presenting the proper stereo image to you. I would probably advise playing something like that through a single full range or something. Anyway, that would be more enjoyable.
I was thinking more of how to tell if you've got the room dialed in, because music is too dynamic to know. I like that idea quite a bit, especially a monaural recording that you were extremely familiar with. That's a good test. Okay, let's jump into talking about actual rooms now. And we've inadvertently covered several of these topics, so we'll maybe breeze a little bit more quickly through those. Okay, so first thing is early near wall reflections. We're going to talk about two kind of extreme situations, overly live rooms and then overly dead rooms. And there are many sources of early near wall reflection, many sources of early reflections. We're going to focus just on the near wall flat single bounce. There you could already imagine, the ceiling bounce is easy to put your eyes on, the floor bounce is easy to think about, the wall behind you reflection is easy to think about. We'll be getting into the cross reflections in a couple slides. There is a reflection that goes from the speaker to the floor to the wall to your ear. Speaker to the wall to the floor to your ear. Speaker to the wall to the ceiling to your ear. Speaker to the ceiling to the wall to your ear. There are just a ton of reflections going on, all of which can mess things up, but just for the sake of this discussion, we're just thinking about the most early near wall ones, and all these principles can be applied to help control those other ones, which are going to pollute the signal in comparable ways, maybe not quite as powerfully as the early near wall, but pretty close behind. And as Tim has pointed out a few times, these early near wall reflections can be helpful in some cases. They can impart a sense of height. They can widen the perceived soundstage in a room that may be too narrow, or speakers that just maybe have a little bit too beamy of a dispersion pattern. The best rooms that we do don't tend to just leave them totally unattended to. When you do have to utilize these early reflections for soundstage width enhancement, it's kind of a band-aid, and whatever the reflection that you're going to be accepting into your listening position from that sidewall, preferably it would be softened in some way. It would be diffused or scattered or partially absorbed. Rarely is it just left fully intact. But in some cases, again, where the room is especially narrow and you may have some other limitations, you can get away with it. It's probably the least offensive of all these generally offensive reflections. So I'm going to look just real briefly at the difference between an anechoic room and basically an echo chamber.
Oh yeah, I guess this graphic on the lower right, we'll come back to that on these next two slides, but the two extremes of the soundstage size and position, and particularly the center image, are just a big, dim, foggy image that tends to move around, and you can't really pinpoint anything within it. You can't differentiate things within it. The lead instrumentalist may be moving as their voice changes, as the note they're hitting changes, as the volume changes, and on the other extreme, like we were talking about with the monaural recording, everything is just snapped down into a really tight, tiny image right in the middle, which again, in some cases, can be kind of desirable, but maybe a little less exciting than we want, and may lack a little bit of depth, may lack a little bit of the immersion or similarity to a live event. So first we'll look at the overly live room, in which the early sidewall reflections are left fully intact. It'll tend to dim the image, like we say, soft and foggy, large and dim image that is, just not. It's going to be set back, kind of a weak center image, because the soundstage is pretty strong on the left side, pretty strong on the right side, and the pretty common experience will be kind of an arced sort of soundstage where the sounds on the side may seem, a little closer, and it just gets a little further away as you work your way toward the center. And this will just be kind of an extreme version of that, where the center image is liable to be just way too dim, and the lead instrumentalist, lead singer is just not popping to the front like you want it to. And all of the source locations will be a little less clear. It ties into that wall proximity graphic that Tim talked about, where things coming from somewhere near the right speaker, you may not be able to tell if it's actually at the speaker or a foot outside of it or 2 feet outside it. It may just kind of come from that area in general, and then between the speakers there may almost seem like very little is coming from there, or you just may have trouble differentiating it, whether it's just right of center or another foot to the right of that. Everything's just a little murky and just hard to really accurately differentiate where all the instrumentalists are falling, or the chorus of singers. And this will tend to happen the most when you don't have any treatment of any type in the room, maybe no carpet, no wall absorbers, hard ceiling. This is going to, not to mention get very clattery and reverberant and echoey and probably kind of painful, but the imaging is not going to do well. So then on the other extreme of things, we have a room here that we've drawn it with no walls, because that's more or less what an anechoic chamber is going to be like acoustically, where just no reflections return back to the listening position from their source. So you just have two nice super duper clean beams coming off the speakers and illuminating you without any interference, and we'll assume for the sake of this that the sound level and the equalization and tone and everything like that is all perfectly matched as well. And this will give you a really, really strong center image. You might even, it probably won't be like right up in your face, but it'll be that tight dime-sized object, floating in space, centered perfectly between the speakers. And the soundstage may even extend all the way from speaker to speaker. It may be, a nice, it may be wonderful for a small jazz trio or a little folk, singer-songwriter kind of situation. But as the presentations get bigger, as the, a stereo recording of a symphony or a, 15-piece funk band or something like that, they're not going to be represented with the same width or depth or height that you would want them to, because of the lack of any other reflections. You'll basically never get the sound stage to wrap around the side, certainly not all the way around your back, and I think it'd be quite difficult to even get the sounds to even go past the speakers on either side. And I think we've all experienced, maybe already today, if not later today, sounds easily extending past the speakers on both sides in a lot of these exhibition rooms here. So it's something that we have kind of come to expect. But an overly dead room that's fully laden with absorption, 2-inch fiberglass covering all the walls and all the ceilings and shag carpet on the floors, this is kind of what it's going to do, which is generally not what we want, and it's certainly not creating the stereo image that we're hoping for. Thanks, Sam. I was thinking I should have gone with this.
So you're saying a perfect room is kind of no fun?
Well, I'd say this is not a perfect room. A perfect room is somewhere in between the two.
A dead room is no fun.
Yeah, there you go. A dead room is no fun. Okay, so now moving down the timeline just a little bit, slightly later reflections. This would be those emanating from the right speaker, bouncing off the left wall, coming back and catching your left ear. Those emanating from the left speaker, right wall, right ear. The main obvious effect there is that you're getting stereo information distortion, wrong information in the wrong ear. And the actual effect is going to depend on how wide the room is, so what the time delay of that reflection is versus that of the direct signal coming off the near speaker. There's going to be some phase add, some phase cancel that's going to color the tone, which, going back to the physiological slides, will mislead you as to the source location.
It'll give you a warble sound.
A warble, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
like
okay.
a warble or like
Yeah.
a zipper sound.
Yeah, warble, zipper. Yeah, where it's doing something very substantial to one frequency and then not the next, but it is at the next harmonic and not in between there. And then that effect will also change based on moving your head just a few inches. It's a serious mess. Like, there's basically no scenario in which those crosstalk reflections are going to be beneficial for anybody. This is kind of like the muck zone. That just, you want to get rid of all these. The other funny one is reflections from other objects in your room will cause additional shift. We got a little funny graphic of the dancing image that the next slide shows in even more detail. So we're just kind of looking from the listening position here, and the red dot shows where the image should be, and maybe where it starts even. After a few notes, there's a reflection off of the body of the lamp that throws the image down and to the right, down 3 inches into the right of foot. And the next note, or the next sonic event, bounces off the lampshade, which is a little bit higher, so now you have another little sound source that's up here, and it raises up the image without shifting it side to side too much more, because the lampshade and the lamp body are in about the same lateral position, so you didn't get any lateral shift, but you got some vertical shift. The next reflection catches the ceiling light, and all these objects are somewhere between the speaker and your listening chair. That's going to dramatically raise the height of the perceived image. May not change the left or right too much, depending on things. Now, each of these objects are going to be reflecting different frequencies more strongly based on their distance from the speaker, and also maybe what they're made of. They might be resonant in a certain frequency, or maybe the lampshade could be kind of soft, so it's going to be absorptive of some of the highest frequencies, but reflective of some mid-range frequencies. The lamp, the hanging light up on top, could very well have a little ring frequency inside of the bowl, and then kick that back out at you. Then the next musical event, there may be none of these errant frequencies, and the image will kind of snap back into the middle, but it'll still be kind of perceived as high because of some residual discharge of energy from that ceiling light. The next event we'll look at is sound bouncing off the top of the subwoofer that's right next to your left main speaker, which will cause the image to shift even further that direction. So, with music being a very rapid series of events, often, tonally fairly different from one another, the position of the image is liable to be just dancing around the whole time you're listening if objects like this throughout the room aren't paid proper attention to, and frankly just moved, gotten out of the way. Okay, so Moving down the timeline a little further, we're up to probably 20 or 30 milliseconds at this point. Maybe more like 15 to 25-ish. This is almost ambience, not quite, but it's getting into some good zone. This is where soundstage depth can be developed or even slightly enhanced. And how that happens, at least with the dynamic boxes that we're talking about most effectively, is two ways. One is the sound diffracting around the baffle and striking off the front wall and then bouncing back to your listening position. Similar to a dipole or better yet an electrostatic speaker, broadband full range, that's throwing high frequency sound out the back of it. Many of us may know that you want to keep those off the wall a pretty good distance, 5-6 feet ideally, and that's precisely to allow this depth to develop. And we can also achieve it with a dynamic box through this edge diffraction around the box that bounces off the front wall. Now you do need some object that's going to throw the sound back at you in a somewhat clean and predictable manner. If it's just a flat wall, that's not generally going to do a very good job of providing this depth, and it's going to emphasize certain frequencies based on the distance, and could cause some more of that warbling kind of effect, or simply just add at certain frequencies and subtract at other frequencies. So ideally we have something resembling a diffuser up on the front wall to soften that reflection and scatter it, and the polycylindrical type, which should more properly be called this sound scattering device, but what it does is it takes the incident sound, throws it out to the side, and a whole bunch of weaker versions of the incident sound. So that kind of that version of reflection off the front wall tends to give the best soundstage depth. The other easy way to achieve that is manipulating reflections that come off the back wall, and we'll actually cover that here in a couple slides. One other principle worth pointing out with that first method of achieving soundstage depth is that the base reflection off the front wall isn't doing anything to help with the perceived soundstage depth, at least in our opinion and experience. So we just want to try to dump that bass, but we do want to retain the treble and the mid-range information, albeit in a delayed and scattered version. So a device of choice at that location is going to be able to trap bass and also scatter treble. So this graphic on the right kind of shows how that happens. You end up getting three wave fronts. The time delay isn't represented there very well, but those waves coming off the tube traps on the front are the ones that are going to give that stage depth. So the latest ones, going back to our favorite little chart there, I've pinpointed kind of the threshold of spaciousness, although that's a little on the short side as far as time delay. It'll just get you there, and a little bit greater time delay and a little bit greater reduction in sound level will get you even greater levels of spaciousness, or they may be easier to achieve. But this concept of about 16 decibels down and 20 milliseconds delay is pretty achievable in almost every listening room, and will give you that sense of spaciousness. As Tim pointed out, it's a sense of width. It'll feel like you're in a larger space than you are, and that's particularly important if the space you're in is kind of small. But there will be ways that we'll show you here to manipulate the timing of a number of different reflections to get you that proper time delay and level reduction. And this little graphic on the lower right shows us a sneak preview of a method that we'll go into in a few minutes. Does stereo information matter with spaciousness? I think we often do try to retain it, but I think it's less important. Once the level is that low and the timing is that delayed, having a bit of left ear information in the right ear and vice versa isn't really degrading the experience any. We are going to, just for the sake of achieving the maximum width possible, outline a method that does maintain all stereo information, but strictly speaking, you don't really have to. So this is also kind of a preview of another method we're going to go into in the future, but we call it the tube trap method, where you provide a wall wash via leaving a portion of the back wall intentionally reflective. Sound from the near side speaker hits the back wall, then it illuminates the side wall, running down kind of the whole length of the room. And normally the tube traps would be on the same side of the wall as that blue ray is that you're looking at, but just for the sake of clarity, we put them on different sides. The tube traps will catch that blue ray that's bouncing off the rear wall and going up to the side wall, and then splash it back toward the listening position, ideally from a bunch of different locations. So the tube trap closest to the rear wall will have a certain time delay. The next tube trap, or should I say the reflection that's bouncing off that tube trap, will have a slightly greater time delay. This next one will have a slightly greater time delay. This one will have a slightly greater time delay. So you're getting a somewhat continuous wash of sound, maybe extending all the way from 20 milliseconds out to 50 or 60 milliseconds. Not in that proximity, that amount of time differential wouldn't happen, but in some bigger rooms it could, and that ends up adding even further to the spaciousness because you're getting a nice smooth decay that's extending over time and not falling off a cliff at a certain point.
Is that totally a function of the spacing of the tubes?
Well, the differential, I guess the step size between those packets of sound coming at you is going to be a function of that. Also, the fact that it's scattering the sound works to our advantage in creating a very smooth decay, because some of the sound coming off each tube trap is going to hit your ear. A lot of it's going to go right past your head and hit the wall on the other side of the room, where there are probably more tube traps, where it's going to scatter once again back at you. Each time it reaches a boundary or a scattering device, it's going to lose some level and also be delayed that much further. So ends up being sounds coming at you from all sorts of directions, and that's also kind of why the stereo information didn't matter as much, because it's going to get polluted anyway down the line as the sounds continue to bounce back and forth between the scattering devices on the walls.
Just one thing that this might not be showing very well is that these have high frequency reflectors that are pointing towards the back of the room.
Right.
So on the front, we're not hearing all that immediately. This is all absorptive on this side. But then when it bounces, the reflectors can scatter it.
Yeah, and for that matter, the direction of the waves on there isn't super accurate. This front one would be aimed such that the waves would be oriented pretty steeply toward the back of the room, not straight across like that. So, yeah, little bit of incompletion there, but shows the concept fairly well. Okay, back over to Tim to start talking about ways that we control these.
Okay. So when we're looking for materials that we might use to put on the walls, we can point out that the range that we really need to look at is pretty much above 250 hertz. Not to say that there isn't directional information below that, because there certainly is, but that's most of it. It's going to be really powerful if we can control that. And something like this Owens Corning fiberglass, you can look at its absorption curve, and it should do a pretty good job. It's something you could use in that range for sure. And so we want to get something that's going to mostly do above 250 hertz for sure. And below that could be useful as well, but for other reasons. And then now we're looking at what some different kinds of absorbers do. The flat absorber panels and smaller tubes for imaging are pretty good. They will go low enough to really take care of that, and the tubes are nice because they're actually quite strong around 200 hertz, and that also has a nice effect on the noise floor. And so if we're looking at that can be a kind of a noisy spot in the room in that range, that mid bass. And as we talked about, listening to transients, having a high noise floor can make them harder to detect. So I know if I get better imaging, if I get the volume up loud enough that I can hear those transients better, and then if the noise floor is better in your room, you'll hear them even better. And So you can see some different examples of different products that we make, the tube traps and what their absorption coefficients are, and also the diffuser properties of a trap that can be, like the tube traps, the smaller ones, they have a kind of polysylindrical effect that tends to soften a reflection in most frequencies, and compared to a flat surface, which doesn't do it doesn't do that as much. So you'll get a stronger reflection off of that, and as we pointed out previously, you can rotate the reflection direction of the high frequency so we can get them late and not early. So we have things we can do there that are really useful. And then, so the ASC's favorite way of doing it is to use, this is one of our preferred methods, is the sound plank, which is a 2-inch panel that's a combination of both absorption and reflection. It's got a reflector strip in the middle of it, and then it's absorptive around the edges, and these have a nice coefficient that's going to really work well in the range that matters for imaging, and because we space them apart, you do get you don't totally deaden the room out, and so the total amount of absorptive material you have in the room is actually more efficient, and we do get some scattering between the panels and from each panel itself. As you can see down here, there's blank wall sections, and the sound continues to scatter out of those, and also off the center of the sound plank itself. It doesn't show that there. And then this would be a typical setup that we would do with sound planks. So we've got them spaced on, they're about 18 inches off the floor, they're about 5 feet high, so they're going to cover your seated position really well. Even if you stand up, you're still going to be, for most people, if you're not too tall, you're going to be over your head. And spacing them about 12 to 16 inches apart, and all along the walls between the listening position and the speaker is going to catch a lot of stuff going on there, and you're not going to have any super strong reflections coming off those early reflections, and it's not going to be an overly deadened effect. And also right behind the listener here is really good. And so in the center part of the room, we'll put some more there spaced. They're all positioned, vertically this way, so they're scattering sideways, and that will create that alone can create a very nice improvement in the imaging in a room and its general overall effect in the room. And so another method that we can use, instead of, it's typical, we think of putting something on the walls and treating that way, but you can also shadow the wall. So this is using light as an example. So imagining a pair of speakers that are surrounded by absorbers, in this case a bunch of tube traps, and then some behind. The sound has a hard time making it anywhere early onto these first reflections. And so you get a very narrow presentation this way, but eventually it can come around the back, and since these are all reflective on the outside surface, this is not actually dead back here, it's just attenuated and delayed. So this is not a typical hi-fi listening position. This is usually a near field, someone doing studio mixing and monitoring, or maybe monitoring a track and doing mastering. They will often use a setup like this, and some of the guys will take it with them. If they're traveling and they're doing work, even if they go into a professional studio, they'll still take this with them because it works so well and it's really consistent. But I think for most stereo listening, we wouldn't do that. So what we'd like to do instead is use this shadowing technique to catch we can actually catch multiple reflections with one tube trap by putting it in a spot where it will block the sound path of the first reflection. So this one's same side reflection, it would bounce down here and hit the back side of this trap, which would catch it. This one also gets caught on the way in and the way out trying to get to you. But then this long reflection that hit the back wall and comes back will hit the diffuser side, or the scattering high frequency, and then you'll hear that delayed weakened reflection. So this is late enough that you'll get a spaciousness effect from this area. So that's one of the issues with catching first reflections. A lot of the research has suggested that what we really like for spaciousness is sound coming, it has to be lateral, and somewhere out in here is often where the first reflection is. So it can be a bad thing to completely kill that reflection. And all of a sudden, okay, well, it's great, now the imaging is tight, but I lost my spaciousness. And so it's sounding kind of sterile and close. So this is a way you can do that with just one properly placed absorber / scatterer that's off the wall in a proper location. On the next slide, we can see how to find that location. And so this is a method that ART has used where they put a flashlight on the floor where the speaker is, and you can actually, if they have a carpet especially, you can see the beam of light on the floor. And then you can beam it until, you put mirrors here on the wall, and then you beam it, you move that flashlight angle until it hits the wall and hits the listening chair. So that place, you know this is a reflection point. And then you put another flashlight off of this speaker until it hits the chair, and then that's the other reflection point, and then you see they cross right there. So that's where you can put one absorbing unit and catch both of them. And if you aim the diffuser towards the back wall, you'll also not totally kill that spot. You'll still get something coming from there later. Too late to ruin your imaging at that point.
So the angle of the light would be where it hits your listening position?
Yeah, so like, if I was the speaker and you're there, I would have it on the floor so I can see the beam. And I would just aim it at the wall until that reflection on the floor caused the beam to hit you. Another way you can do it is put the mirror over there until you can see the speaker. And or if I'm standing by the speaker, I can see you. So you can do it a number of ways. But this is kind of nice because if you do it the other way, you kind of have to do hit and miss. You're moving the speaker until, well, you have a mirror there and you can see both speakers if it's a big mirror, and then you have to just move the tube trap so it blocks both speakers. And if someone's helping you, that can be easy, but it can be hard. No more, this way, don't in. No. So it can be tricky to find it. What's that?
Wide with a tall mirror.
Yeah, a wide mirror would be ideal. Apparently, I haven't got to play with these yet. Art had these roll-out mirrors, so you can roll them down like this, but it's just a mirror. So. And here is just an example of a well-treated room. I don't know whose room this is, but that is a well broken up room, and they've got studio traps along the side here that could do that shadow casting as well as a lot of stuff on the walls and angled ceiling there. And so the tube traps work. They're a good tool for this, and where to position is at points where they block and alter the early reflections, the first and second reflections, which would be the first reflections would be the same side, and second would be the opposite side. And the ceiling is also good. I mean, if you can work on those ceiling reflections and floor reflections, floor is hard because what are you going to do? Put a carpet down? That can help, but you got to be careful with carpets because sometimes they just take the highs out and nothing else. So, but generally, a good carpet can be more good than harm, especially if it's just right in the area early on there. And like with the lighting, we can figure out where to put them. But a large degree, kind of all over the room is nice. If you can break up and diffuse the room, you can't overdo it. But I don't think this room is overdone. It sounds really good. So, and there's other advantages to it besides the imaging. There's tonality is another thing that happens when you break up a room. It tends to sound smoother and more natural. Anything else I should mention on that one?
Real quick, the thing about the mirrors, I know how important first reflections are. You mentioned putting the mirrors on the walls. You can also, if you can manage it, put them on the ceiling and put them on the floor.
Yeah.
To really look at everything all from all angles and see what first reflections you can.
Yeah. If you had a whole mirror room, you would just see your speakers over and over and over. And you're hearing them like that too. They just bounce. Of course, they get weaker and weaker. Usually faster than the mirror does.
And then also, you make sure your electronics are matched, because sometimes speakers look identical, but the woofer's a little tweeter, maybe it's a little off, and that'll kill your image right there because you don't have matched components. That's really important. Especially for surround sound too, but also for just stereo. Make sure that your left and your right sound identical.
Yeah, if you don't get that started, the room can't fix it after that. Exactly. So the source, it can't be any better than your source. So that's true. Thank you.
My question. So to diffuse and scatter, which one's better, the panel or the trap?
Well, it depends on how much space you have. As we showed, the panels, those sound planks, as we call them, they work beautifully, and they really can improve a room. But if you use like these studio traps or that similar size trap, along the walls, we've got more things we can do with it. We can use one to block a first and second reflection point, as well as by pointing its high frequency, scattering surface towards the back of the room, we can then offer a delayed reflection at that same area to maintain spaciousness. And so we can get a nice, crisp, clear imaging without, and also have the advantage of spaciousness in the room by simply delaying those reflections instead of just killing them altogether. So the tube trap is more useful, but it takes up more space and it costs more. So this isn't always appropriate for every room. And
when you show the tube trap placement for getting the first and second post-speaker reflections, are you pulling that tube trap away from the wall? It looks like there's a point. So it's actually in the room.
It's in the room, yeah, and that may be a reason you can't do that. It may not be practical, but if you can, it's a really clever thing. You mark the floor, yes.
And to add to that, if the speakers are not as drawn here, where they point straight out, if they're pointing towards the sweet spot, does that change? Does that change how your flashlight is pointing out?
Well, we wouldn't do that. We would still, the reflection is going to be in the same spot, but it's going to be, it'll probably help the imaging. It depends on the speaker. Some people do not like to sit perfectly on axis on a particular speaker, and sometimes people will actually cross them, so it crosses in front of you, or crosses right at you, or crosses behind you. But usually some kind of tolling seems to be better because you're shooting most speakers, I think, are designed to be heard on axis. And so they'll put them on axis, and then that makes the high frequencies on the reflection a little bit lower, because almost any speaker is going to beam the higher frequencies more, and then as you go off axis, they're going to be less. So if you widen them, you're going to get more high frequency off the first reflection points. So it would depend on the speaker, I think, and how much you should tow it in. But it definitely has some effect on what will happen, but it won't change the reflection point unless you actually move the speaker.
Is there a first order recommendation on how far those traps should be spaced along the wall, along the side?
Oh, that can vary on the size of the room. Usually, what we say on tube traps, if you put one at the first reflection point and the second reflection point, there's usually something like that. Usually a couple feet at least difference between that. Well, might be a little closer if they're on the wall.
We have this recommendation, then the shadow catching concept. So that's kind of the answer.
I know with the sound planks, we put them on 16-inch centers. You could put a lot of tubes that way too. I would put I'd put them probably a couple feet apart. Would be great if you could do that all the way down the room.
And there's also the this version of things too, that all these functions can be tied together. You can use these same ones for shadow casting that are used for back wall sound scattering, and the spacing between those is going to affect the kind of the smoothness of the decay. But the primary spot you want to hit is going to be that one. Then the rest kind of fall into place from there. It's either that one or these two. Take your pick. Same effect as far as absorption goes, but this position is liable to give you a better diffusion opportunity because of its position. But as we see from this one here, this one's kind of like our near wall reflection. This one's kind of like our cross wall reflection, and they're both also providing diffusion or scattering. We're just kind of trying to, save some money and some setup by just doing the same thing with one unit right there, or just offering you the option anyway.
Yeah. If you are to run, like this is a situation where we've got those four running down the wall, I would space those a little wider than I would space the plank, just because the trap is, quite a bit deeper. And so
3 feet?
Yeah, I would give them some room, because from the speaker's point of view, because of the thickness of the trap, when they're behind each other, it's just going to see a solid wall of trap. And so you could space them further and maybe get a little bit of wall. It's going to the tube trap's going to capture a lot more of the initial sound. So if you put them too tight and put them all the way down the room, you could make the room a little too dark doing that. So
this spacing here is pretty typical for that kind of situation. They're 3-4 feet on center.
Yeah, that should be, because there's just a lot more going on there than there is with the planks that are up against the wall, which save you a lot of space.
A little closer than these. These are like 5 on 7.
Yeah, a little closer. Well, I guess the one thing I was going to add to that too, Tim, is that if you can't place things on your walls, or you can't permanently install a bunch of tube traps in your room, we may not have time for Q&A, but we got lots of Q&As.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so yeah, kind of in the back there, all the stuff about the speaker perfection, we did cover that a bit earlier, and I agree 1,000%. Excellent points. So one technique that we've been kind of hinted at earlier with this graphic on the side is called an ambient kicker, and it will create a situation that's a bit like the live and dead end. And the room that this was created for was the dead end, and the introduction of the ambient kickers and then the tube traps to then subsequently scatter the treble is the live end. So an ambient kicker, what's it made out of? In this case, we made it out of some tempered glass, a little piece like 3 foot by 3 foot. This is an actual case study from 2012 that was documented fairly well. Where to place it, we put it on the back wall, up high. Let's pop to the next slide real quick, actually. Back to the last one. This picture right here shows a view from the speaker position at the listening chairs, and so these are the kickers up here, up above their head, angled down and outward just a little bit. So all the sound coming off the speakers was to strike those flat reflectors and shoot it back down the sidewalls. The whole reason for this was the owner of the room bought some nice big Wilsons, I think, and then paid a very well-reputed acoustics company to come in and treat the room for him. And they just lined all the walls and the ceiling with 2-inch fiberglass and the back wall, of course. Just completely destroyed the life. He had nothing resembling a soundstage. No acoustic feedback when he's in there talking or walking or eating his popcorn or whatever. And it just was a terrible audio room. It was basically an anechoic chamber. So he called us, begging to fix it. And the solution that Art Noxon came up with was to install this ambient kicker there. And this wasn't the first time that he'd done this, but I think it was, has the neatest documentation. So directly to the results, actually the last point on the previous slide was just where to aim it. And just to say it again, we put a bunch of tube traps down the sidewalls, just like we have in so many other slides here. And their diffusers were aimed such that the sound was scattered back over all the listeners, left side information coming from the left side, right side information coming from the right, maintained all the way through the signal path. And what that did, the client told us on the next slide, immediately enlarged the sound stage in both dimensions. Better separation between all the instruments and performers, especially front to rear, so it added depth, added accuracy, added soundstage width, soundstage height. These are all the things we're looking for that's the whole point of this talk, is to establish a three-dimensional audio experience. Much improved low-level detail, because the tail of the sound wasn't just completely snapped off. The sounds didn't go past him and just disappear. They went past him, bounced back down the room, splash, 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 eventually make it back to him. So you actually have a decay, and that's where that's the benefit of the live end dead end, is despite being completely dry for the first 20 or 25 milliseconds, after that there's a nice smooth decay. So that allows you to extract a lot more low-level detail out of the recording, which gives you all the more location cues, all the more harmonic detail, tons of benefits. And a funny last two kind of incidental benefits was made the bass punchier, eliminated the upper mid-range harshness. Those last two are largely just because of the absorption that the tube traps provided at their location. His room was completely overdamped in the highs, but basically out of control below 250, as the curve that Tim showed you earlier. So we introduced some devices that were able to actually provide some absorption, a fairly decent amount of absorption below 250, so it just helped balance out the absorption curve, and that included some of the upper mid-range harshness that I'd say again was just due mostly to the imbalance, that there was an utter lack of highs, so his tendency was to either crank the level until finally there's enough highs, but at the cost that now there's way too much mids and probably too much bass, so it would just start to break up, in the mid range and probably get really muddy in the bass. Okay, real quick calculations as to how you would construct a ambient kicker, or just determine whether or not it's even a possibility in your room. This is similar to so many graphics that we've looked at during the talk here, but we want to look at the distance from the speaker to the back wall to the sidewall diffuser, then the diffuser to the listening position, and compare that total path length to the direct shot from the speaker to the listening position. And we want that different. We want it to be greater than 20 feet difference. That'll give us our 20 millisecond delay. And I'm not going to get into how exactly to achieve the 16 or even 20 decibel sound level reduction that we'd be looking for to achieve this ambient spaciousness. But most likely, you will achieve it just based on expansion loss and some reflection loss off the back wall, some loss as the sound is coming off of the diffuser. So in some cases, in some really short rooms, you may have to have your sidewall diffuser up in the plane of the speaker, or maybe even on the front wall, in order to actually achieve this full 20 foot differential and the proper delay. In most rooms of typical listening room sizes, somewhere about halfway between you and the speaker is going to be about right. And you may recognize that location once again as being right about where it wants to be to shadow both the near wall reflection and the crosstalk reflection. That one's drawn up against the wall, but it's all pretty close. So having some tube traps between you and the speakers on the sidewall is a recurring theme here. Okay, so into the noise floor issue and showing why it actually does have an effect on the stereo image. The graphic on the left was actually developed to just show how a noise floor can vary the harmonic content, all the upper partials of any note that comes through your system. But it also works to show us that the decay is buried by a running noise floor in the room. The noise floor primarily comes from this phenomenon called head-end ringing in the front of the room that the next slide will show in more detail, but I'll stick with this one for just a second too.
What ringing?
It's called head-end ringing.
Head-end. And
the next slide will go into detail on that one, but just for visual purposes, these little graphics on the left, with a high noise floor, there's a lot of stuff happening that you just don't hear. And with a low noise floor, a lot more details pop through. A lot of those details are the ones that are going to inform you as to the location of an instrument within the soundstage and the depth cues and the spaciousness cues. If the ambient tail that we just went to all this trouble to develop by installing an ambient kicker and a bunch of tube traps in the sidewall, if that's buried completely beneath the noise floor of your room, then you're not going to hear it. It was a entire total waste of time. It's not going to benefit your stereo imaging or anything else. So head-end ringing is a thing that tends to happen when, just based on the fact that the sound is emanating from the speakers in all directions. It's a low frequency or low mid-range phenomenon. It's usually worst between about 80 to 250, so we call that generally the mud zone. That does overlap both bass and lower mid-range, and we focus on the portion of the sound that's emanating straight up and straight to the sides, because that is a plane of sound basically that echoes and stores itself very efficiently. All the sounds are have a normal incidence against the surface, so So zero grazing, so they maintain the most energy, and it's also the shortest path between the speaker and the wall, between the speaker and the ceiling. So a portion of the sound is coming off the speaker toward you, a portion of it is going toward the front wall behind the speakers, but this portion is staying right in the plane of the speakers and maintaining its energy for a lot longer than sound going those other two directions. And as it builds up, or just as it is stored and circulates in that direction, it's still expanding like any sound wave will. So it marches its way up to the front of the room, then marches its way back down past the speakers, and marches its way all the way down the room to you at a speed that's much, much less than the speed of sound, about 120 feet per second. That's kind of hypothetical, depends on the dimensions in your room, but it's a good rule of thumb. So it's, somewhere near a tenth of the speed of sound. So you have these direct sounds coming right at you, and then you have this cloudy wall of sound following very slowly behind it. And that wall of sound is being created with every powerful sonic event. And you can imagine that would rapidly build up into not just pulses of sound, but basically a continuous wall of sound. It'll take a few moments or instants, if you will, to reach you, but sure enough it does, and it's extremely high in level. And we ran an experiment back at the shop that we're going to show you here that shows the spike in energy that represents this head-end ringing. So we used a balloon pop as the impulse source noise. To start things off, we went out into an open field, replicated anechoic conditions, popped the balloon, recorded it, traced the energy versus time. That's the top orange trace, and it's nice, very low level, smooth roll off like one would expect. So then we came into the sound room and set it up with one end being fully, I'll call it anechoic, but it's really just a dump, a noise dump. No sound entering that was going to escape. The rest of the room was completely live. So if you walked in this room and clapped, it would have a fairly reverberant characteristic because most of the room was totally untreated. If you went down and stood between these wedges and you clapped, it would sound a little funny, it would sound a little less reverberant, but still, not completely dead because some portion of your hand clap left where you were and went and reverberated around the room and came back, a little bit lively. So we set up a microphone both on the live end, about where we would put speakers, and another one tucked up inside the wedges. So the idea was any sound being launched at that microphone inside the wedges, it should only hear that sound. And it shouldn't, wouldn't hear that there would be no additional, very, very little additional reverberation making it into there from a sound that originated outside of that zone. So the first trace here is the microphone up on the live end of the room, which one would expect to basically exhibit the reverberation characteristics of the room in general. And so it does. It spikes up pretty loud. It got quite loud in there at the onset of the burst, and then it decays down, fairly rapidly, but not too rapidly. And there's no major zigs or zags or peaks or anything like that. The far microphone showed a much different curve, where it got the initial spike looked similar to this initial spike. It was maybe a little bit louder, and then the overall shape of the curve was virtually identical to the blue one. But this big spike, after about 30, actually a little bit less, after about 20, actually maybe a little bit more, maybe 40 or 50 milliseconds. So that represents a single pulse, illuminating, lighting up the room in the plane of where the balloon pop occurred, and then slowly expanding its way down the room. And because it was only a single burst, it was only a single pulse. It was a pulse, not of quite as sharp a duration as the initial burst itself, because again, that sound expanded toward the front of the room and folded back on itself. So it's kind of kind of a block of sound moving its way down the room. But nonetheless, still pretty quick in duration. So you can basically imagine pretty quickly that notes, music full of 16th notes, some of which are very impactful, is going to create the reverberant noise floor conditions we saw in the last couple slides ago. And it's going to bury a lot of detail, and it's going to last 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 milliseconds after the end of the last sonic event. And that as well is just going to totally obscure the ambient tail and just really hurt your chances of achieving good imaging. So they say it all starts with bass control, it all starts with the foundation. This is no exception. You need to have everything lined up just perfectly within your system, but we can also do everything we've outlined so far as sidewall reflection control and ambient kickers and shadowing and all that stuff. And if our bass is just still wild and out of control, it's going to create such a noise floor conditions that we're not going to get any good imaging. So you kind of have to do all these things. Let's check out the next one.
I have a question about end ringing. Is it desirable? I wonder if it's desirable if you want to recreate a live concert hall experience.
No, I'll say.
Well, it depends on the taste, right? You can
Yes,
go with the actual sound that you're hearing, or changing it to your taste also.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do here is set up a listening room that recreates that plays for you the content of the recording most accurately. So we don't want an excessive room-induced noise floor. If that content is in the recording, then yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it come through the speakers cleanly the way it was meant to be heard, not by the addition of some additional rumbling of our room. So yeah, we want to trust the recording and mastering engineers and the musicians who initially played it to be giving us the best material, and we'll try to recreate it as faithfully and as without any coloration as best we can. So another big source of noise floor in a room is just the room surfaces. We call it room breakup because the walls and the ceiling will start playing back at a certain sound level. You'll turn them into tympanic membranes, and they'll start kicking their own sound off like a subwoofer or a bunch of subwoofers. The math was done that you count the ceiling and all four walls of a typical listening room. If they pump as little as maybe a 1/16 of an inch, which is not really asking that much actually if you go and push on a wall, and if you're playing music at 110 dB peaks down at 50 hertz, which sounds loud, but at 50 hertz, I'm sure many of us have done it. That's equivalent to having another 2 or 3 another maybe 2 18-inch subwoofers pumping at half-inch excursion or more even. It's surprising, amazing really how much sound energy can be recreated by the walls and the ceiling. So without laboring the point too much, that's just adding that much more bass, and it's a time delayed version of the bass, similar to the head end ringing in that it's coming at you after the event that you wanted to come at you. So it's just going to bury more of those details, bury that ambient tail, and hurt your imaging. Oh yeah, best way to solve that one is to use damped construction. So I'm not going to pitch our product too much more right here, but we do have some pretty detailed damped construction systems that Robert Harley did an awesome video about. But suffice to say that you want to damp those walls. You want to just build them properly so that they don't ring, and then that problem goes away. Okay, so now wrapping up of the whole thing, stereo imaging, we're trying to create a three-dimensional audio landscape within the confines of a two-channel playback system. We looked at the physiological components where the ear brain is pretty impressive. Psychoacoustic ties directly to it. The fact that we all have survived and came from descendants our ancestors who survived pretty well means we inherited these psychoacoustic mechanisms that we can now manipulate to provide us with some pretty awesome listening experiences. Sound transducers, the rounder the edges are, the better is the easiest takeaway on that, but perfect balance between your speakers matters critically, placement matters critically, the type of speaker we acknowledge that many different types will provide different experiences, and a lot of them have their various benefits. Room reflections, some are kind of helpful. In fact, those providing soundstage depth and ambience and spaciousness are kind of critical, in fact, in most rooms. But in general, most of the reflections are not all that desirable, particularly the early ones. Reflection control, we just want to use the reflections to our advantage in every way we can, use the appropriate type of absorber to control the reflections within the certain time frames. In most cases, it's going to be the 2-inch thick flat panel absorbers. In other cases, it's slightly larger units like these studio traps behind us. In the case of the head end ringing and things like that, some even larger tube traps or other type of absorbers might be important. Diffusers and sound scattering devices definitely play a role in there for softening the reflections that we do want to keep, because we don't want to absorb them all. And the last thing is the room noise floor. Don't underestimate its negative effect and its importance in establishing this ideal sound image, sound stage, three-dimensional representation of the sound field. So yeah, big thank you to Lou, Gary, Art, and all of you for coming out. Really pretty impressive turnout for 11 o'clock on Friday. So thank you very much.